You can't leave. The clerk's whisper was louder than a scream. I stood at the federal building counter, gripping $12 and an eviction notice, waiting for a passport stamp so I could take a janitor job. Instead, the screen between us flashed a violent, pulsing red. A silent alarm strobe began to spin on the wall. 2 armed guards stepped forward, hands on their holsters. "Ma'am," the clerk said, her hands shaking. "This social security number belongs to a child who died in 1991. My world tilted. Dead. I was standing right here. But before I could argue, the elevator doors slid open. A man in a sharp black suit stepped out, walking through the armed perimeter like he owned the building. He didn't look at the guards. He looked straight at me with an expression that terrified me more than the guns. It was recognition. He stopped 2 feet away and said 3 words that erased my entire existence. "Welcome back, Noah. If you found out your entire life was built on a lie, would you run or would you stay to find out who you really are?" I didn't end up in a holding cell. I didn't get handcuffed to a metal table bolted to the floor. Instead, the man in the suit, Mr. Sterling, led me into a quiet, soundproofed office that smelled like expensive coffee and leather. He didn't read me my rights. He poured me a glass of ice water and set it down on the mahogany desk with a gentleness that felt foreign to me. "Drink," he said. "You're in shock." I took the glass, my hands trembling so hard the ice rattled against the rim. I was 32 years old. I had spent the last 14 years scrubbing floors, waiting tables, and dodging eviction notices, believing I was nothing more than the unwanted stepdaughter of a small-town sheriff. I believed I was Mara, the mistake, the burden. Sterling slid a file folder across the desk. He didn't open it. He just rested his hand on the cover. "We've been looking for you for 3 decades, Noah," he said softly. He flipped the folder open. Inside wasn't a mugshot. It was a digital rendering, an age progression photo of a young woman. She had my eyes, my jawline, my exact nose. But she didn't look tired. She looked loved. "That is what you would have looked like if you hadn't been taken," he said. "Your name is Noah Hayes. Your family made their fortune in Texas oil, but they would trade every oil well they owned just to see this face again. You were kidnapped from a park in 1991. The room spun. I gripped the arms of the leather chair to keep from floating away. Kidnapped. The word should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like a key turning in a lock I'd been picking at my entire life. Suddenly, the cruelty made sense. I thought about Richard, the man I called my stepfather. The sheriff who told me I was trash, who made me sleep on a cot in the laundry room while his biological daughter, Bianca, got the master suite. I thought he hated me because I was difficult, because I was unlovable. But he didn't hate me because I was a bad kid. He hated me because I was a crime scene. Tears started to fall hot and fast. I wasn't crying from fear. I was crying from the sheer, overwhelming relief of it. I wasn't broken. I wasn't a burden. I was a stolen treasure that someone had tried to throw away. Sterling seemed to understand. He pushed a sleek black phone across the desk toward me. "Your parents, your real parents, are on a private jet. They're landing at the executive airport in 20 minutes. You're safe here, Noah. This is federal territory. No one can touch you." I looked at the phone. It was a lifeline. For the first time in my life, the ground beneath my feet felt solid. I wasn't the girl with the eviction notice anymore. I was Noah Hayes and I was going home. I reached for the phone, my finger hovering over the screen, ready to make the call that would end the nightmare. I finally let my guard down. I finally let myself believe that the fight was over. That was my mistake. The door didn't just open, it exploded inward. I didn't even have time to scream. 2 uniformed deputies stormed the room, hands on their weapons, their boots slamming against the polished floor. And behind them, striding in like he was walking into his own living room, was Richard. He wasn't wearing the stained flannel shirts I was used to seeing him in. He was in his full sheriff's dress uniform, the star on his chest gleaming under the office lights. He didn't look at Sterling. He looked straight at me and his eyes weren't angry. They were dead. "Step away from the suspect," he barked. Sterling stood up, placing himself between me and the deputies. "This is a federal investigation, Sheriff. You have no jurisdiction here." Richard didn't even blink. He slapped a folded piece of paper onto the mahogany desk. "I have a warrant signed by a county judge 10 minutes ago. Grand larceny. Felony charges." He pointed a finger at me, a finger that had poked my chest 1,000 times growing up. "That woman stole $50,000 worth of diamond jewelry from my wife's bedroom before she fled this morning. I'm taking her into custody." "That's a lie," I screamed, the shock finally breaking. "I haven't been to your house in years." "Save it for the judge," Richard sneered. He nodded to his deputies. "Cuff her." One of the deputies grabbed my arm and twisted it behind my back with enough force to make my shoulder pop. I cried out, the pain blinding. Sterling moved to intervene, his hand going to his own jacket, but Richard stepped in close, chest to chest with the federal agent. "Careful, agent," Richard said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is a state crime. Exigent circumstances. Unless you want to obstruct a felony arrest on record, you'll step aside. You can interview her after we process her at the county jail." Sterling hesitated. I saw the calculation in his eyes. He knew the law. He knew that technically a local felony warrant could pull me out if they claimed flight risk. And Richard knew it too. He was weaponizing the bureaucracy I didn't understand. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into my wrists. The click of the lock sounded like a gunshot. I didn't steal anything. I pleaded, looking at Sterling. Please don't let him take me. You said I was safe. Sterling's face was tight with fury, but he didn't draw his weapon. He couldn't start a shootout with local law enforcement in a federal building over a property crime warrant. Richard had played this perfectly. Richard grabbed my arm, his grip bruising. He leaned in close, his breath hot against my ear, his voice a whisper that only I could hear. I told you, he hissed. I told you never to dig. I told you to leave it alone. Now you're going to die in a holding cell, Mara. You'll hang yourself with a bedsheet before your rich parents even touch the tarmac. The blood drained from my body. He wasn't taking me to jail to book me. He was taking me to jail to execute me. Move, he shouted, jerking me toward the door. The hallway stretched out like a tunnel, the fluorescent lights blurring overhead as the deputies half-dragged, half-marched me toward the elevators. My boots skidded on the polished linoleum. Richard's hand was a vice on my bicep, his fingers digging into the tender flesh between muscle and bone. That grip. I knew that grip. It wasn't the first time he had marched me out of a door. Suddenly, the federal hallway dissolved. I was 18 years old again, standing on the porch of the only home I'd ever known, clutching a garbage bag filled with my clothes. It was raining. I was shivering not from the cold, but from the terrifying realization that I had nowhere to go. Inside the house, through the bay window, I could see them eating dinner. Richard and his biological daughter, Bianca. They were cutting into thick, bleeding steaks. The warm yellow light of the chandelier glinted off the crystal glasses. I had just eaten a cold sandwich made from the heel of the bread loaf because Richard said steak was for people who contributed. I remembered knocking on the glass, begging to come back in just for the night. Richard had opened the door, looming over me just like he was looming over me now. You should be on your knees thanking me, he had said, his voice dripping with that sick, self-righteous poison. I kept a roof over your head for 10 years. I fed you. I clothed you. And you weren't even my blood. Do you know what a burden you were, Mara? Do you know how expensive it is to keep a mistake? And I had believed him. God help me, I had believed him. I had fallen to my knees on that wet concrete and thanked him for the scraps. I had spent the next 14 years carrying the weight of that debt, believing I was unworthy, believing I owed the universe an apology just for existing. But that was the trap. The realization hit me harder than the handcuffs. It wasn't charity. It was camouflage. He hadn't been raising a stepdaughter. He had been hiding a witness. Every time he made me feel small, every time he told me I was lucky he didn't throw me in the street, he was grooming me. He was training me to be grateful for my own prison. He needed me broken so I wouldn't ask questions. He needed me desperate so I wouldn't look at my own birth certificate. He wasn't my savior. He was my warden. The fear that had been choking me since I walked into the building evaporated. It didn't fade. It was incinerated by a white-hot flash of pure, clarifying rage. He thought he was dragging a scared little girl to jail. He thought he was handling Mara, the burden. But Mara didn't exist anymore. I dug my heels into the floor. I stopped fighting the deputy's grip and instead went completely limp, dropping my entire body weight. It's a trick you learn when you're trying to move heavy furniture alone. Dead weight is impossible to move gracefully. The sudden drop caught them off guard. The deputy on my left stumbled, his grip slipping. We jerked to a halt 10 feet from the elevator bank. Get up. Richard snarled, yanking on my arm. Stop making a scene. I didn't get up. I planted my feet and slowly straightened my spine, pulling against the handcuffs until the chain was taut. I turned my head and looked directly into Richard's eyes. For the first time in my life, I didn't flinch. I didn't look down. I looked right at the man who had stolen my life and I let him see exactly what he had created. The victim was gone. The witness was awake. And she was about to burn his world to the ground. Check the timestamp. My scream tore through the lobby, echoing off the marble walls like a gunshot. It wasn't a plea for help. It was an order. The deputies hesitated, looking down at me. For a split second, the confusion on their faces gave me the opening I needed. I didn't try to stand up. I locked eyes with Sterling, who was running toward us, his hand reaching for the radio on his shoulder. The warrant. I yelled, my voice cracking but loud. Check the time he signed it. Richard kicked my leg hard. Shut her up. Get her in the elevator. But it was too late. Sterling didn't slow down. He didn't ask questions. He threw his body weight against the elevator doors just as they were sliding shut, forcing them back open with a screech of metal. 2 uniformed Federal Protective Service officers materialized from the security checkpoint, their hands on their weapons blocking Richard's path. Hold it. Sterling barked. His voice wasn't the calm, soothing tone he'd used in the office. It was the voice of a man who commanded federal task forces. Nobody moves. This is obstruction of justice. Richard roared, sweat beading on his forehead. I am a sheriff and I am executing a lawful arrest. Let me see the warrant, Sterling demanded, holding out his hand. He didn't ask. He waited. Richard clutched the paper to his chest for a second. A tell. A poker player hiding a bad hand. Then, realizing he had 3 federal guns pointed in his general direction, he shoved the crumpled paper at Sterling. Read it and weep, Agent. Grand larceny. Signed by Judge Miller this morning. Sterling snapped the paper open. He scanned it once, then looked up at the digital clock above the security desk. Then he looked at the security monitors behind the guard station. You're sloppy, Richard, Sterling said, his voice dropping to a terrifying calm. He turned the paper around so the deputies could see it. This warrant was signed at 8 o'clock sharp. He pointed a finger at the security monitor on the wall. But my building's cameras logged Mara entering through the north metal detectors at 7:45 a.m. The lobby went dead silent. She's been in federal custody since she walked in, Sterling said, stepping closer to Richard. Unless she can teleport, she couldn't have stolen jewelry from your house at 8 o'clock if she was standing in my lobby 15 minutes earlier. The deputies holding me loosened their grip. They looked at each other, then at Richard. They realized they weren't executing an arrest. They were accomplices to a kidnapping in progress. It's a typo. Richard shouted, spit flying from his mouth. The clerk made a mistake on the time. She stole it last night. The warrant says this morning, Sterling countered. And if you lied on a sworn affidavit to get this signed, that's perjury. If you're trying to drag a federal witness out of here on falsified charges, that's kidnapping. Sterling signaled to his guards. Release her. Now. The deputies let go of my arms like I was on fire. I scrambled backward across the floor, putting distance between myself and the man who had stolen my life. Richard stood alone in the center of the circle. His face was a mask of purple rage. He looked at his deputies who were backing away. He looked at Sterling, who was staring him down with cold contempt. He looked at me, standing up, rubbing my bruised wrists, no longer the scared girl he could bully into silence. He realized he couldn't talk his way out of this. His authority didn't work here. And that's when he broke. I'm not leaving without her. Richard screamed. His hand flew to his belt. He didn't draw his service pistol. He knew that would get him killed instantly. Instead, he ripped his taser from its holster, the yellow plastic gleaming under the lobby lights. He leveled it at Sterling. Back off, he yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. I am taking custody of this suspect. Anyone who interferes gets dropped. He was insane. He was holding a federal agent at gunpoint in a federal building. But I looked at his eyes, wide and frantic, and I realized he wasn't trying to arrest me anymore. He knew it was over. He was just trying to survive the next 5 minutes. The guards reacted instantly. 3 Glock 17s snapped up, trained on Richard's chest. Drop the weapon, Sterling ordered. Now. For a moment, it looked like Richard might force them to shoot him out of spite. Then the madness drained from his eyes. He wasn't a martyr, just a bully. He tossed the taser to the marble floor and raised his hands. Fine, he sneered. Let's do this properly. He reached into his jacket. The guards tensed, but he pulled out a document, snapping it open with practiced flair. You caught me, Richard said lightly. The warrant was fake. I knew about the kidnapping. I helped cover it up. He looked straight at me, smiling. I kept you. I hid you. I stole your life. Sterling stepped forward with cuffs. That's a confession. You're under arrest. Richard laughed. No, I'm not. Check the calendar. The kidnapping happened in 1991. The statute of limitations expired in 2011. The room went silent. Sterling didn't move. Richard seized the moment. You can't touch me for kidnapping or fraud. I walk. And legally you're still incompetent. I control your assets. He turned for the door. I'm suing all of you. You're right about the statute, Sterling said calmly, stopping him mid-step. But you forgot one rule. Richard frowned. Which is? Sterling lifted a thick file. The constructive trust doctrine. You don't own property obtained through fraud. You hold it for the victim. The file hit the bench with a thud. We traced the ransom payments, the foster stipends, the investments. That's my money, Richard snapped. No, I said, stepping forward. You just managed it. For me. Sterling's voice was cold. Civil fraud doesn't expire when the victim was a minor. Your assets are frozen. Your house is seized. Your accounts belong to the victim. He pointed at me. It all belongs to Noah. Richard recoiled, terrified, not of prison but of losing everything. But I'm the sheriff. You laundered money and filed false taxes, Sterling cut in. Those clocks are still running. The guards moved. This time Richard screamed as the cuffs snapped shut. You're nothing, I whispered. The lobby fell quiet. Sterling slid a paper toward me. Asset transfer authorization. Sell it, I said, signing. Just make sure he never goes back. I had nothing left, but I was free. Sunlight flooded the lobby as two figures rushed in. I didn't need proof. I felt it in my bones. Noah, the woman whispered. I'm here. They held me like they'd never let go. For the first time I was home.